Good afternoon again, everyone. Thank you for returning. We're more than halfway through, and we've had a great morning, so we're hoping to maintain the momentum. We wanted to make sure that when planning the symposium that we included practitioners, because as even Dean Stern just mentioned, former Dean Stern just mentioned, this was such an integral part of who Paul Marvin Rudolph was. We have a distinguished panel today of practitioners who have had the pleasure and the pain of working on updating, renovating, restoring, and in other ways intervening and responding to Paul Rudolph works. Each architect will present their projects and challenges, and Bob Bruegmann will respond for us and lead questions. The first member of the panel is Andy Bernheimer. Andrew Bernheimer is a Brooklyn-based architect and assistant professor of architecture at the Parsons School of Design. Bernheimer leads an eponymous firm responsible for a wide variety of residential, civic, and cultural projects, including a new multi-unit affordable housing development across the 5 boroughs, as well as an award-winning private residences in the Northeast region. He edited the book Timber in the City, which features innovative practices in wood construction, published by Oro Editions. He also sits on the advisory board of the Institute for Public Architecture. He is the co-chair of Van Allen's Program Council and is a fellow of the Forum for Urban Design, as well as a member of the Architectural League of New York. In 2018, Bernheimer was elevated to the College of Fellows of the American Institute of Architects. As director of the Master of Architecture program at Parsons from 2012 to 2016, Bernheimer oversaw a graduate program known for its connection between theory and practice, with a distinct focus on New York City's communities and their constructed environments. The program includes a signature design-build studio and cross-disciplinary curricular opportunities with graduate programs in lighting and interior design. Previously, Bernheimer was a founding partner of the award-winning firm Della Valle Bernheimer. In 2009, Think Make, a monograph of the first decade of their practice of Della Valle Bernheimer, was published by Princeton Architectural Press. Please welcome Andy Bernheimer.
Well, thank you, Sean. Thanks to the Rudolph Foundation, Sean, Dan, thanks to all the other speakers, and thanks to the, I guess, ever and always Dean Stern. When Sean invited me to this, I was very happy to accept the invitation. Had I known that I was going to have to follow Bob, I might have rethought that. It's like a nightmare to follow him. One thing that I've realized in listening to this morning's talks, and I say this not because I think that it's really charming to be self-deprecating, though it might be, is that I realize that now I'm probably the least knowledgeable person among this really incredible group. And so at the moment I'm feeling quite self-conscious about that fact. I did want to talk to you a little bit about 23 Beekman Place, which was Rudolph's own residence in New York City on the east side of Manhattan. And I really want to acknowledge the people who actually also made this project happen. First, Sean alluded to him, Jared Della Valle, my good friend, former business partner, and also an incredible architect. A gentleman named Adam Rudig, who went to Yale and was in our office at the time and led this project. And Adam's work was absolutely indispensable. The contractor, Corey Ward, who helped bring us this project, and also the client, who I will protect by leaving him nameless. This project is iconic. I think many of you probably know this. And you face a real dilemma when you have to work within that icon. There's the legacy of the history of that place. There's danger in engaging that kind of space. A few things that went into that sense of risk when we started this project is that I might not even be, but I was definitely not a mature architect at the time that we were talked to about this project. Jared and I were definitely not Rudolph scholars, actually, nor am I a Rudolph scholar now. I was not a Yaley. I got rejected by Yale. So we can psychoanalyze that all day long if we want to. But there was a lot of there's a lot of history in this building. This is the post-restoration of the exterior on Beekman Place, which is on the east side of Manhattan. The rear of the building faces the East River. You can see it from the FDR Memorial on Roosevelt Island. Built in 1978 or completed around 1978, a site of Rudolph's experimentation about architecture, about materiality, about space. It was a site of constant change. It had made some popular waves. It was in Wes Anderson's The Royal Tenenbaums. The actor Ben Stiller in the scene, he performs a fire drill with his kids in that scene. If you know anything about this apartment, if you've been in this apartment, a fire drill in that space has got to be practiced dozens of times before you get it even half right. Anyways, a little piece of popular culture. In 1997, the house changed hands. The photographs by Peter Aaron from Esto that you see here, and you'll see sort of dotted throughout this brief presentation, this is the project that we knew, right, from popular publication, from having seen it in print, never having seen it in person. Reflective surfaces, kaleidoscopic spaces, vertigo-inducing spaces, really just the most incredible thing you can imagine being inside a townhouse in New York City. When we received this project, we actually got a call from the contractor with whom we had done a project out on Long Island. And he said, we have a space. Client is moving on from their current architect. It needs help. So we said, okay, what is it? He said, the address. And Jared and I sort of, our ears pricked up a little bit. And we said, yeah, can we come see it? So we did, and what we walked into, in fact, was a total war zone. The house had been through some changes after Rudolph passed away. Owners following had actually made some slight renovations to it. There were conventional bathrooms put in, just the accoutrements of normal domestic living that this apartment didn't necessarily work for. But when we walked into it, we found a place that had been stripped of a tremendous amount of what made this place so iconic. You can see the left Peter's photograph, and on the right, this is effectively what we walked into. Balusters had been stripped. The chrome that you see on the beams, which actually was Mylar film, had been peeled off. Construction on a new set of plans had been started and then stopped. You see the famous chrome stair, folded plate steel stair on the left, short acrylic rails, and on the right, what we walked into. On the left, his bedroom with his bathroom with the skylight beyond, and on the right, really, there was nothing left of this place other than the space and some of the finishes. That space was critical. Additionally, there was a neighborly dispute. This amazing wall of windows in the main domestic living room on whichever level it was, because there were something like 36 horizontal layers, going to an earlier comment about the irrelevancy of the plan. The neighbor next door and the owner had a Hatfields and McCoy's kind of goings on. That neighbor started to build an unreinforced masonry wall up and then eventually past this window, which has glorious views to the southeast. So there was a lot of stuff going on. There was also, from our standpoint, a lack of knowledge about Paul Rudolph, to be completely honest, other than what we knew about his drawings and what we knew about the images of the projects that he made, which obviously we knew, but we didn't really know much about them. So we tried to do a little bit of forensic archaeology to find out what was this original place like, because it had already been through many changes. We couldn't find much. There was not much with the New York City Department of Buildings. There was actually not a whole lot here at the Library of Congress, which Adam came down to look at. And so we had to stop the project entirely. We actually asked the client for a little bit of time so we could reconstruct a set of drawings. And we also had to engage a different way of looking at architecture from our standpoint. Jared and I went through school and were maybe the last class at Washington University in St. Louis where we didn't have to learn to use the computer. But we found that orthographic drawing, hand drawing, was really not going to work for this. Either we were going to have to build at full scale, like literally full scale to understand the space, or we were going to have to do it virtually. So this was this was actually the very first project that we worked with entirely in the computer. We did our research as best we could to understand the logics, the material strategies of Rudolph within this place, and we found some things. Speaking to this place as a laboratory, this was one of the great finds. We think this is his handwriting, though those who knew him may tell us it was someone else's. Things like it was constantly being altered. It says melamine everything, right? So there were places where just cover it in melamine. And that was the kind of stuff that happened in here where it kept changing. So these are the drawings that we did to understand this place. The chromed stairs and the vertigo that you feel there. On the right, you see an entry space, which is a double height area with a walkway and a stair that led up to the main living space, but we had to also accomplish code-compliant construction, which was another trouble. We also had to put in a sprinkler system, a mechanical system, and so we had to do this all within a space that didn't really have those accoutrements. So thinking about materiality, reflectivity, threshold, and this is what resulted. So where we couldn't use chrome paint because the chrome paint was too expensive, we had to use chrome laminate to create reflection. We brushed stainless steel for floors to create reflection to draw light deep into spaces. We did explore his details and his connections and tried to replicate some of those in places while inventing new ones. We had to snake sprinkler lines through cabinetry to get them to where those sprinkler heads needed to be and cloak those systems because systems weren't really the primary articulated element in this space. Space was. On the left, the rendering while we were designing. On the right, you see that entry space. On the right side of this photograph, this is actually a sink. You can see the trap. The trap goes into this wall and leaves while sprinkler lines come up and over, all hidden inside this multiplicity of reflective matte, white, chrome, stainless steel surfaces. And there's the restored. It's also very questionable whether it's a restoration. It's not really a restoration because we don't know what we were restoring. It's a renovation. I guess it's definitely a renovation. It's not preservation because we weren't preserving anything that we can't preserve what wasn't there in the end. So it's a very strange exercise in a combination of all of those things. Some of the drawings that we did explaining, again, this is actually more interesting maybe to architects and to me than it is to other people, but the confluence of structure, of sprinkler lines here which wrap up and over, and trying to think about all the surfaces that we had to wrap to make this place not like it was, but so that it was respectful and thoughtful to what Rudolph had considered this place, which was a lab, a studio, a home. And there's a view which is really strange, looking up towards an upper floor from the entry space, and it's actually way more destabilizing in person than it is in photograph, and it's pretty destabilizing in photograph. Another view of this is the entry space. The amount of different tones of light, warmth, cool, all affected by the materiality, by the translucency of surfaces. And the master bedroom, which had been completely eliminated, was on the left is the space of the master bedroom, on the right a space of the master bathroom with a chromed mirror so you can see through from the sink to the bathtub, a kind of play of this duality of translucency and transparency. And this photograph I like not because of what it looks like finished, but because this starts to summarize all the different things that went into the house, from systems to thinking about light, to thinking about the planes, the replacement of acrylic. These were acrylic handrails with glass, a conversation that went on for a very long time to try to think about how do you make something code compliant, but that also keeps the spirit of this place going. So on the left, what we walked into, and on the right, what we walked out of. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy, and he will be right back, so not to fear. Next up, we have my fellow Cooper Union alum, Toshiko Mori. Toshiko is the Robert P. Hubbard Professor in Practice of Architecture at the Harvard University Graduate School of Design and the principal of Toshiko Mori Architect. Mori has designed a residential compound, an addition, and a guest house around the original Paul Rudolph house in Casey Key, Florida. Her firm's recent work includes master plans for the Brooklyn Public Library Central Branch and the Buffalo Botanical Gardens. Thread, a culture center and artist residence in rural Senegal, Foss School and Teachers Residence also in Senegal, and the new canopy at the number 7 line for the Hudson Park and Boulevard in New York City. The firm was also recently selected to design Brown University's expansion for the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs. Their projects have been internationally exhibited, which includes the 2012, 2014, and upcoming 2018 Venice Architecture Biennales, the 2017 Chicago Architecture Biennale, and the Louisiana Museum in Copenhagen in 2015. Architectural Digest listed Mori amongst their biennial AD 100 in 2014, 16, 17, and 18. She regularly contributes to publications and has won numerous awards: the Academy Award in Architecture from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the AIA New York Chapter Medal of Honor, and in 2016, she was inducted to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Her projects have won her many awards from Architizer, The Plan, and the American Institute of Architects. She's also recently been named the recipient of the Farnsworth Art Museum's 2018 Maine in America Award. Mori served as the chair of the Alvar Aalto Medal Jury and has recently been on the jury for the Adelaide Contemporary International Design Competition. Also noteworthy, like Rudolph, Miss Mori is a Scorpio. Please wish her a belated happy birthday, and please welcome Toshiko Mori.
Good afternoon, thank you. Yes, I share the same cycle of birthdays as Paul Rudolph. And I just have to say, I have to thank Bob for this amazing talk this morning. And as a chair of a department of architecture, who did I model but Rudolph? And yes, I brought Yale tradition back to Harvard, but who knows? Harvard and Yale in a football game all the time. It goes on one place and the other side. And stealing faculty with each other, and that's the game. I think without rivals, we can't survive. I think only rivals make it better. But this whole legacy is very important for you. And also, Cooper Union graduates, that's Sean and me, John Haydock always used to tell me that Rudolph is the first person who gave me the real teaching job. So in a way that the generosity of Rudolph described by Bob and diversity of inclusion was a very, very important legacy he set forth. So the project I talk about is a Burkhardt House in KCT, Florida, 1957. And this is a period in which, right after collaboration with Twitter, and it's unique in a sense that it has this more Wrightian influence, and as you can see, it does have more heroic ideas of cantilevers and so forth. But it's one-story building, and if you can see, it's actually used to be open in being. I was talking to Stephen Harris, called Dog Trot, but now it's been closed. So my client had bought this building and lovingly restored it. So I have nothing to do with the restoration here, but it's actually kept up in really good shape. And then Rudolph was alive then when I received the commission. And the reason I received this commission is that I was a trustee at Van Allen Institute and charge of presentations and exhibitions. And we hired J. Abbott Miller to do Paul Rudolph exhibition because not too many people had seen his Southeast Asia project, Big Towers, and combined it with the furniture. And when that happened, we said, oh, he says, I have all the sketches and drawings, and okay, says Van Allen will try to frame it, and Paul Rudolph said, no, I will frame them myself. And he said, oh, that's perfect. And then J. Abbott Miller figured out all the configurations. We're waiting. This huge roll appears as delivered from Paul Rudolph and marked the drawings. I said, what is this huge tube? And when I unrolled it, what Paul Rudolph did is he went to Connecticut local meat packing factory and vacuum packed his drawings. So the whole thing looked like a shower curtain, the whole thing unrolled. And I said, well, how are we going to do it? He says, just hang it like a shower curtain so you can see from inside or outside, dressed or undressed. And okay, that's what we do. So that's, and then the client found me, who we had a mutual relationship, and then she did tell Rudolph, I'm doing a guest house. She said, she's not touching your house, but we bought a property next to it. Our kids had grown up, and we're going to commission guest house. So she kind of remembered, oh, that's a girl who did this exhibition, right? And she says, okay, she can do it. But I wasn't able to show him the project. This was done in 1999, the first one, as you can see, T-shaped guest house. This house, Rudolph House, is long, 100 feet long, a one-bedroom house. And the family kept growing 3 kids. At night, you have to go 100 feet to get a glass of water in the kitchen, so forth. They said they want something compact that they can house 3 kids. So I proposed this addition, not really addition, guest house in the next property, which is connected by a path. And the code changed. Hurricane Andrew hit this area in 1992, so complete upgrade, the wind code, hurricane code, and also flood. So we cannot build on the ground anymore like he used to do. And we had to put them up on pilotis. In Tallahassee, they will figure out the wave crest height for each region, very detailed data. And then no habitable space can be existing below it. So, and then also hurricane code would not allow me ever to be able to build in wood like Rudolph did. What's funny about this region is that it was Hurricane Andrew, no Irma didn't damage it. It's on a sand dune, it's a very narrow sand dune, Gulf of Mexico Bay, and Gulf of Mexico has a very, very shallow bed. So when hurricane comes to this area, it comes from the south and goes to northeast, or it goes to the extreme west. So that's one of the reasons why I think Carl Abbott is here. Many of the houses, buildings from Rudolph 50s and 60s still remain intact. It's a great, great location, the secret that. But at the same time, we had to do the code. So my project has to do is how to continue the legacy of Rudolph and yet meet the current code, and to have this idea that it's a new building. It's by me, but not by Rudolph, but this idea of conversations going. So it's 3 bedrooms and heights, and as you can see, it's got a stair in the middle, and 2 buildings are separated. It's not connected, so that it will reduce the impact of a wind load. And my important aspect of that, it's going to be built on stilts, like you see, it's quite of a civil engineering there. Use same concrete blocks. You used to use Ocala blocks in a quarry in Florida, but that quarry has already been excavated out. But we were able to use a local, more pink-like, with some fossil in it, very similar to it. And then the whole thing is built in concrete and steel in combinations. They're cast in place concrete and steel verticals. That's how we actually worked the whole way through. And then this stair is in a position of the past. It's looking back at the main house. And from the main house, this is how you look back at it. And also, energy code is another one, very strict energy code that we have to work on performance basis, but we also want to keep the character of a large expanse of glazing, which is very much of characteristics of Rudolph houses. And what we did here, is to have some fit pattern. You can see the views later from interior. From exterior, it looks white, opaque, but it's a series of white dots, which is helping to insulate and helping to reflect the light off. But from inside, it's black dots, so you can see through it. It keeps a transparency. And as I explained before, it had to be raised, but I actually raised it higher than required so that there is a view between a gulf and bay that can be continuous. And also the new residential area, habitable space, is within a tree canopy so that the tree canopy can provide the shading. And what I learned about Rudolph in this period, he was very, very sensitive to the site and siting, ventilation, shading, everything works very well, very comfortable. And there's something of an optimistic, relaxed, tropical nature to this period, Rudolph, which may not appear elsewhere. There's some remnants of in Southeast Asia, but it becomes a much larger project, so forth. So I want to really understand this idea and what he would figure out, how he would do in the site and so forth. So for me, it's interpretation in the spirit of Rudolph, as you can see. And the short side is facing the bay side, and the long side, the Gulf side. And you can see that's a short side facing the bay. So in a sense, from the road, it has less of a presence of addition, but in a Gulf side, beach side, it can have much more dramatic side. And that's interior, as you can see, because of the dots, you can see right through them, simply furnished, and a casting place concrete with inlaid bamboo wood floor. And this is also a polished casting place concrete here. And then furniture, always interested in material experiments in which I used the bulletproof fiberglass as a material to do all the cabinets. Again, the tropical climate, cabinets are challenges, so in a way, say of easy maintenance, which he also considered to the idea of his main house as well. And also environmental issues or biological requirement, biology of a site. The Gulf of Mexico is a sea turtle habitat, so we are not allowed to have any lighting exposed, no lights after 10 o'clock at all, darkness, so that turtles don't get confused where the light is. And also when we are building this, we had to do a diary for manatees. Manatees protect the seagrass and aquatic vegetables. It's so to prevent erosion of a site. We had to do diary every day to sighting of manatees, and basically we had to sign off as with a building permit that if we hurt or even kill manatee, me and a contractor will get to go to jail. So in a way, I think we had to deal with not only Rudolph, but sea turtles and manatees, and hurricane and flood, in addition to all of these issues. So that's actually the site as it is. And as you can see, it is a very large house, but also the effort is to make it compact to see which is the main player of this whole idea. And that was 1999. In 2005, by then their kids had grown up, had families. They started to occupy not only the guest house, the main house. So they called me back and said, I want an addition to the Rudolph house. And he said, really? He says, yes, I have so many grandchildren. We are being kicked out, but we want to live nearby. There's one thing, though, that Rudolph said to me is the fact that he was happy that I'm not touching the house because he hated the pool. Pool was never meant to be. He says, anything, bury the pool and everything. He says, it has nothing to do with me, so I avoided confrontational aspect with Rudolph about this. But then now I had to kind of deal with this. And L-shaped piece is the addition, which actually connects to the Rudolph. And it has a very delicate balance. I think the drawings may be a little difficult. I think that this one shows. I just took one element of Rudolph, extended it to make addition as a trellis, some really delicate element which had to do with a garden, but keeps the module of his architecture into connecting. So in a sense, it is addition by very minimum means, but in essence, it will read as independent building. But again, this is steel and concrete building and glass, and actually repeats the same wooden module. And therefore, like in previous one, the steel structure can be as small as the same size as a wood structure, so it just does not look like a steel structure, but it retains a similar modulation scale of buildings of a Rudolph. And then that's the pool he hated. But I didn't touch it, but you can see the trellis, which actually kind of disappears, but in a sense it connects it very, very delicate relationship to what's been happening here. And this is the master bedroom above, and now grandparents' house, and also works as a pool house for kids. The previous house had stairs, stainless. Stainless doesn't mean stain-free, stainless. And the clients, they are bankers, they have no time to clean. Can you really figure out a new material? Rudolph always experimented it. So to come up with new material for the stairs, so I came up with this fiberglass stair, which is made by Eric Gertz, who makes America's Cups boats in Rhode Island. It's a molded stair, weighs 300 pounds, carried by 2 people, and then it's hung by quarter-inch rod from a ceiling. And this was a challenge because you can imagine with the code compliance and everything, but it turns out to be the load to the stair to the boat is a lateral load, is the same as a wind load. So with a boat building engineer and local engineer, when they look at the formula, it completely matches, and therefore this passed the code for strict Florida code officials. So this was kind of interesting innovation, which in the back of mind, Rudolph always urging me to innovate, to experiment, and so forth. So that's actually the appearance, and also having a live oak as intermediary in this sense also helps in terms of managing buildings on this site is a landscape. Cornell Rothschild is a landscape architect of that. So this is the true project I'm showing today. Thank you.
I'm so glad the manatees were not harmed so you could be with us today. Our third practitioner is Stephen Harris. A native of northern Florida, Stephen Harris is the founding partner of Stephen Harris Architects in New York. He was educated at New College, the Rhode Island School of Design, and Princeton University. He is a professor of architecture at Yale, where he has taught for more than 25 years. And he previously taught at Princeton and Harvard. Since establishing Stephen Harris Architects in 1985, he has led the design of an extensive range of residential, commercial, and institutional projects with a particular fondness and skill for exploring the architectural potential of residential life. Under his direction, the firm has completed projects in New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, Florida, California, and other areas of the United States, as well as Mexico, South Africa, Costa Rica, and Croatia. Diversity is a hallmark of his prolific and innovative work. AIA award-winning projects range from Manhattan Townhouse to a bowling alley and pool hall in Queens, New York, to the southeastmost private residence on the Baja Peninsula. In 2008, Harris was inducted into the Interior Design Hall of Fame. Harris's work is regularly featured in a variety of international publications and books. Stephen Harris Architects has been included in the AD 100, Lux Gold List, and Elle Decor A List since 2012. Harris co-edited the book Architecture of the Everyday with Deborah Burke. His insights, experiences, and works have contributed much to the landscape of contemporary architecture, and he continues to lecture worldwide, from seminars at Yale to the Biennale in Santiago, Chile, to here. When he's not in the office, Harris can be found on vintage driving rallies around the world. In the last few years, he completed the Peking to Paris Endurance Rally and came in second for the Great South American Challenge. Please welcome Stephen Harris.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Bob, for that extraordinary talk. Thank you, Ian, George, Sean, and Dan for helping to organize this. My relationship with Paul Rudolph goes a long way back. I grew up, as Sean said, in northern Florida, more precisely on the Atlantic, just south of Jacksonville. There was a house there when I remember the time I was about 14. When I was about 17, I went to the parties there. They were extraordinary parties. It was 1967. It was the Milam House. It was in the middle of a sand dune near a surfing beach, and there were a lot of very interesting people in pajamas and palazzo pants and sometimes less. But it was that period. Then when I was at New College, in choosing to move off campus, because of a trustee of the college, was able to spend a semester living in one of the Wheeland cottages, one of the catenary roofed little cottages on Siesta Key, which was an extraordinary experience, as you can imagine, for a kid who was 21 or something like that. In my next encounter with Paul Rudolph was at Yale. When I first began teaching there and would stay overnight, there was no way you could afford to stay at the Colony. That cost like $70 a night, and it was outrageously expensive. So Yale happened to have this guest apartment, which was adjacent to the elevator core, and had a little shower, a little sitting area, all of that. I think there's quite a long list of interesting people who have stayed in there. One of my greatest memory of it is the shower. The shower was about this big, and like the outside of the building was bush-hammered concrete. So it sort of brought new meaning to the term exfoliation. I mean, you often came out of there bleeding. Finally, the fourth interchange or experience with Paul Rudolph is this little house in the West Village. Unlike Andy or Toshiko, this was a very modest project for us, and it was a very curious house. It's at 42 West 11th Street, and Rudolph was working for a man named Donald Zucker and his wife. He was working, they were real estate developers, and he was working for them on much larger buildings in Midtown and Uptown. Some of you may know The Future. It's a 33-story building on 2nd Avenue, or it's on 3rd Avenue and 32nd Street. You can spot it because all the balconies go off at a diagonal. It looks like a axonometric drawing that somebody actually built the axo. Instead of it, so all the balconies are parallelograms. Well, in the process of doing this building with, working on this project with Zucker, the Zuckers were in the process of a divorce, an extraordinarily contentious divorce. He was running off with his secretary. And part of the settlement was that he had to have Rudolph renovate the house they had bought the year earlier on 11th Street. This is an 1840s polite little Georgian house in the middle of one of the most beautiful streets in the West Village. The facade, obviously, being in a landmark district, was not open for discussion. And when he began doing this, Mr. Zucker decided to do it as frugally as he could. So whatever one would have associated with Rudolph at the time, instead of being rendered in steel or bronze, was rendered in 2x4s and 1x6s. Instead of having any integrated mechanical system, it was all piled on the roof. Instead of modifying the existing stair or any of the wood framing in the house, it was all left. So it was this sort of odd, sort of quirky house. The house was then in '93. The interiors were redone. There wasn't much of the Rudolph interior, I don't think, done originally, but by the time it came to us, the interior had been redone. It was actually featured in Florida Design Magazine. I'm not sure why, but the thing I remember most is that on the ground floor, the room closest to the street was a plastic one-piece shower, bathtub thing, which people in my office refer to as the orgasmatron. And it was completely visible from the street. And we're fairly confident that was not a part of the original sort of Rudolph piece. The thing that intrigued us the most was the frame on the back of the house. Obviously, that's the thing which is most distinguished about this, and the stair to the garden. Obviously, the Walker Guesthouse. I was lucky enough recently to walk through the recreation of it. It had been on the grounds of the Ringling Museum in Sarasota, now has been transported to the Palm Springs Art Museum in California and will be the centerpiece of modernism. But from what I understand, it is a precise replica of the original. And it is absolutely astonishing to look at the level of detail and the care with which what is apparently an extraordinarily modest little wood screen porch has been detailed. Every casing around the door, the consistency with which every member is attached is really beautiful. And it seems to me that that frame is one of the first times Rudolph uses that kind of articulation of double-edged, in this case, wood construction. In some ways, it seems to me, it's wood trying to be steel. It's also a framing of space outside of itself. The house is, I think, 24 by 24. And then when you add out the outriggers, it obviously becomes considerably larger. On the left is the Milam House, the site of rather extraordinary parties. The others are also examples of the relationship between, in some cases, the frame is an expression of the room that is behind it, what I think Sean and Dan were calling thrust of various kinds. In others, it's some sort of cross between a brise-soleil and a compositional strategy that somehow is metaphorically indicative of what's happening spatially behind it. In the case of, obviously, other examples of this same thing in a more urban situation are the modulator building his own house, and the house that I think of as the Halston House, which I understand Tom Ford is in the process of buying and hopefully restoring after its unfortunate tendency for the last few years. But again, these are steel buildings, steel frames, same idea as what began with, I think, the Walker Guesthouse, then on to the Milam House and things of that sort. Clearly, the modulator building, those frames don't have a direct one-to-one correspondence with the spaces which are behind them. This is the front of that house in about 1930. It is the one directly above the tripod with the dark door. It still looks very much like that, probably in slightly better shape. This is the only drawing we have of the house. It's from the New York City Buildings Department. We don't believe that that you have any archive for this house. We've tried, and researched it under the address, under Zucker, under, all of those things. If they do exist, it'd be fabulous to see them. But I think it was a kind of professional courtesy that was done to a client for much bigger projects. What's interesting to me about it is the right-hand side of the drawing shows the frame. That's not what was built. There's a different layout and a different configuration of spaces in it. The photograph to the left is the most photoshopped, hot-rodded real estate listing photograph you can imagine. We think it was probably taken about 10 years before the house was sold. On the right is a photograph, pretty much the condition of the house when we encountered it. Everything was wood. The wood was incredibly deteriorated. However, it was still quite clear in how it was detailed that it appeared, at least to us, to be wood representing steel. The way in which the 1x6s are appended to the side of the 2xs trying to represent a W section. And so we documented the entire thing piece by piece. The other thing that was happening was it being wood, it being in New York, there being termites and everything else was falling apart. There was no possibility of preserving it. You couldn't disassemble it without it rotting. There were places where if you could not walk down the steps because you would step through a tread. So, but I think a lot of its intention was intact even if it had been rendered in a, shall we say, cost-effective manner. Everything was, if you look at the dimension on the one with the tape, you'll recognize that that does not appear to be a legitimate lumber dimension from that period of time. Things pretty much like the Walker Guesthouse. Those pieces of wood were actually milled to meet other dimensions. It wasn't off-the-rack stuff that was just put together. It was quite intentional. The far right is what the roof looked like. The entire mechanical system was up there. In the center is what the penthouse or the master bedroom was like. And this was when the house was being shown. This is as good as they could make it look. This wasn't after it had been abandoned for 6 years. This was, people were living here. Then we began to look, in our proposal, we were looking very carefully at how he detailed steel and how you could make the steel be detailed like the wood. In some ways, what we were doing was making, in this case, it's not steel, it's bronze, make bronze look like wood imitating steel. So it's like a double, I have a friend who talked about in the 80s, people were buying Pontiac Fieros. If you know them, it was a cheap little mid-engine car. And somebody was making a fake Ferrari F40 body that they were putting on a Pontiac Fiero. We always wanted somebody to buy an F40 Ferrari and put a Fiero body on it. So in a way, what we're doing is going from using a very expensive material to imitate a cheap material, which was imitating a moderately expensive material. So, it is that screen which consumed a lot of our effort and time. It was actually made by this extraordinary firm in Paris. They also have a place in, it's called Horace Bronze. They also make the most beautiful windows on the planet. But they made that screen and the facade behind it for us. Because they were able to do things in dimensions which were very much like the much earlier steel dimensions from the 60s. I mentioned that the drawing on the left shows what was filed with the building department. The drawing in the center shows what we encountered. You will notice that the horizontal member between, if I can make this horizontal, can you see that? Is that moving? Okay. Means there was a large panel there and a smaller one there and a smaller one there. That's not what was built. It was a sort of small, the largest one was there and the upper one was there. The section of the building did have a double height space in the center and a offset sort of balcony. Those we adjusted and rebuilt. So again, in this case, we were able to make the plan and the section conform to the elevation. So, there's if not a direct one-to-one correspondence, that elevation does have some relationship to the internal organization of the building. That's how it is now. It's, the master bedroom was rebuilt, if you recall the photograph of all the detritus that was up there. The glass is, there are, as I think Toshiko discovered the same trick, very fine wires that have to meet code in order to accommodate the handrails. The stair is, the original stair had 2 stringers because it was wood. This has 1 because it can. The handrails are even finer than the ones that were in the original Rudolph house. I can't remember the author, but there's an extraordinary essay on the welds in the Farnsworth house as a kind of index into the whole conception of how the steel and the glass meet. I think the stair here goes a long way toward talking about what the idea of the section is. The stair is, because it has no vertical surfaces, because it is a piece of the ground that has been cut and transported and stacked as it goes up. It's like a progressively raised ground plane and how it's framed. In this case, the owner chose to excavate the entire garden about 12 feet. So the garden is on the roof of a series of spaces which occur below. So in laying out the garden, similarly, that same idea of the stair, of where there are a series of planes which slide past each other, I think suggests it. And in fact, that bamboo is growing out of a garden that is 9 feet lower or 10 feet lower than that plane. So there is a whole space underneath there, and there are these other planes that stack down there. That was never there, but it was a way of engaging that garden. Again, the stair, rather than using glass, there was water that was used underneath it, hoping to reflect it and avoid the problem of what you do underneath the stair. This is the facade. It is, although it is bronze, it is painted bronze. Landmarks determined that bronze was too posh for this house, and therefore asked us to paint it. So it is bronze painted to look like bronze, which is imitating wood painted to look like bronze, which wanted to be steel in the first place. So it's a little like Sartre's Waiter and Nausea. It's how many removes from the obvious can you get? So that's from above, looking down on it, where I think here are parts of those same things originally and after. That's the original condition. Similarly, that was the original stair. You can see that it had double stringers. I think we have one. These are, a bit thinner and finer and have a different detail about their edge. Those of you who know the Farnsworth house well know that the detail of the treads that go from the garden to that first landing are exquisite. Another shot, you've already seen that. Other photographs of how it looks from the side, how it's built. If I have a regret, it's that the bronze is painted. I think it would have been beautiful had it all been allowed to remain that way. Right. Thank you.
Don't go too far, Stephen. Our respondent, and we're going to invite the panel back up in a moment, is Robert Brightman. An architectural historian and critic, Brightman is also Professor Emeritus of Art History, Architecture, and Urban Planning at the University of Illinois at Chicago. He is the author of monographs on Harry Weiss, if anybody's just been in the Metro, Hullabert and Roche, and the 2005 book Sprawl, A Compact History. His latest work, Art Deco Chicago, Designing Modern America, is hot off the presses, so you should all get a copy. We have asked him to come respond, so we invite him up, as well as the three panelists, please.
While we're assembling, let me just add another piece of this biography. I spent a lot of time in 1980s with Paul Rudolph, and we've spent not much time in this symposium talking about that. At the time, it's hard to imagine how much out of fashion he was in the architectural world. I was there to do an exhibition for Steelcase, another exhibition for the Art Institute, and I also worked on 3 books that were being done at the time. It was very interesting that although I think he felt very slighted and felt that the generation after him had taken a lot of his ideas, particularly Robert Venturi, he never fought back. He never, in public, made any statements, but he was obviously intensely angry, and you heard his comments with a lot of expletives talking about the contemporary scene. So I think it's one of the things that was most striking, and I added here because we're at the Library of Congress, they have the drawings, was his attitude about these drawings. You've heard that he laid these drawings out, but he didn't always execute them. So we were sitting in his apartment, and on the ledge behind him, he had a whole stack of drawings. They were just sort of helter-skelter there. He took them out to explain to me how badly they were executed by people in his office. So he was holding this up, and he said, and this part down here, and he's hitting this drawing, this Mylar, this beautiful ink on Mylar drawing. I was trying to get drawings from him for the Art Institute. We were trying to get the Christian Science Center because it was in the Midwest. So he's taking out a drawing, this was of the Concourse building in Singapore, explaining how badly it was done, hitting this drawing, and then throwing it across the room. And I'm thinking, you know, this is the drawing that's been published in all the major magazines, and he's just throwing this thing around. Fortunately, it was Mylar. I don't think it was ever really injured. But we're here now to respond to the three panelists we've heard, and we're also at the end of our time. So I thought the first thing we should do is just, among the three of you, if any of you have comments on the other two of the work that you've seen, and similarities, things that you think were different, any commentary about the panel?
I think we can agree that Andy had the hardest job.
I think so.
No. That's a whole different league.
You had to deal with the entire ghost.
And a ghost that was transient because it was changed constantly. I mean, it only stopped changing because he died. You know.
But I would say that a commonality, though, is also about trying to discover intent. So even in the rear frame, and that it was a material trying to be like another material, and if you have to do it new or you have to do it again, and it's a different time, technology is different. The materials aren't always different, but technology and how you make things out of those materials is different, that you still have to discover, you have to kind of, you're not inhabiting another person's body, that's not what it is, but you do have to think through what was the intent. And it's always risky because this whole, you know, there's a larger question, I guess we're near a building where this idea of original intent might be a little bit testy right now. But what was the intent of the architect? It's there in all of them, I think. I don't think it's not exclusive to the ghost. That's a great word for it, by the way. I had never thought of it as that there were ghosts there. But that intent, I think, is common.
But also I think there's commonality in which none of us, how do I say, is trying to historically try to restore it. We know that's a futile effort. And I think what we try to do is how to advance the legacy of Rudolph and how it can survive, not only today, but 20 years. And somehow our work contributes to the legacy for the future generation to maintain continuity in discourse. I think that's maybe commonality I can see.
Speaking of continuity, I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts. All three of you were working on buildings where the aesthetic, I think you could say, comes out of the 50s and early 60s. What do you think of that later work? Would you have the same attitude toward it? Do you think it's as good? Would you have been as careful trying to restore the buildings in Asia?
I would, yes.
Yeah.
I think it's actually totally underrated, those buildings. And I think more people are visiting, and I think it's gaining status. I think it's ahead of time. Now they're all looking at Rudolph building as an amazing prototype for all the fast development that's happening now, and him and Harry Reese.
But I think one of the virtues of what we were working on is they are particulate and trabeated. They're made of parts. They're not cast in place, highly continuous thing. I have a friend who's involved with the restoration of Bob Hope's house in Palm Springs by Lautner. And it's a nightmare because although it's actually a wood dome covered in stucco to look like concrete. And you know, there were also 4 or 5 versions of it. It burned during construction, and which one do you go back to and all of that. But I think, at least for us, and I think to some degree in his house as well, you know, you could theoretically, I mean, almost like the Walker House, you could take it apart and put it back together again. In other words, you could unbolt it or unweld it or cut it apart because it's not a continuous three-dimensional form.
That's such an important observation. And in fact, in his apartment, one of the most difficult things was that there's actually a lot of millwork in that space. In that house, there's an elevator that gets you up the building. That elevator is about as deep as this table and about as wide as this table. It's a tiny little elevator. And there is obviously a stairwell, but getting that idea of parts, which I forgot to mention, it's so important. So millwork, in fact, all the millwork pieces, and there's quite a lot of millwork in that house, was actually brought in pieces, raw. So it was drawn and then shop drawn and then fabricated with some fungibility, brought in pieces, scribed in place, so assembled like IKEA furniture, basically, scribed in place, cut, brought out of the site, taken apart, brought out of the site, finished, right, shop finished, brought back in pieces, and reassembled in site. But that conception of it as a kit of parts, in a way, gives you, it does, as very young architects, it actually allows us to break down the project to understand the deeper logic of assembly. And I think that's a great observation.
Isn't it Blue Dot who just came out with a flat pack house or something?
Yeah, a few people.
In some ways, the Walker Guesthouse is a demonstrated version of that because, it was disassembled, put in a truck, shipped to Palm Springs, and put back together again. And, it absolutely is disassemblable.
Right.
In that way.
But it also allows you to disguise your own hand in a way if you follow the logic. So I think your question about whether the larger scale, the cast buildings, like the bigger, it would be a very different exercise, very different process.
Well, isn't it interesting, though, that even in the buildings that are concrete, that he was still thinking of modules? It's just the modules got bigger, so he was thinking about them almost as trailers that were then put up, and you could have done it in steel and hung them, but instead he was just doing it in concrete. So in a way, it was just the module becoming bigger. It was still kit of parts. Why don't we throw it open to audience and see if there's any questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Are any of his houses in New York City open to the public, or have they been open during Doors Open, for example, or Open House New York, or is there opportunity for the public to see any of his properties in New York City? Thanks.
If you can convince the real estate agent that you're rich, you can go see the Halston House. Yeah. I mean, it was for sale.
I think the modulator building was open.
Yeah, the modulator building is available to be seen.
Yeah.
You just have to ask Sean and Dan. They could probably get you in.
And Mr. Harris, in the house you renovated, why didn't you just do it in steel?
It was a decision. First, we could not get the quality of fabrication in steel that we could in bronze. These days, structural steel works to a much looser tolerance. And the quality of the steel sections themselves and their consistency is not what it is in bronze. And wanting to keep it as precise as we could, we chose to make it in bronze. And also, the owner decided that he wanted it to be renovated once. And he didn't want to do it in steel and then have to repaint it in, 20 years and have to do this. And, I think it was his decision, and we supported it just because it was I don't know if you've ever worked with the level of detail to which a bronze fabricator works is much, much more precise than it is for most steel fabricators that we've encountered. I'm sure there are, if you dealt with a sculptor.
In the middle there?
I can just talk about it. My question has to do mostly with Mr. Bernheimer and Mr. Harris's projects, because both of you mentioned an interesting aspect of Rudolph, which was concealing the building systems in part with the sprinklers and later on with the electrical plants. But one thing that I was wondering if you could respond to was that it wasn't necessarily his modus operandi to conceal everything. For example, in Beekman Place, there was a really beautiful moment where the trap and the hot water and cold water for the faucet actually goes outside the wall, and the pipes are decoration themselves. I know in contemporary architecture, concealing all of those things is much more of an aesthetic necessity, and I was wondering if you could comment about his not so dogmatic understanding about those aspects.
I think in some cases, it's a good question. In some cases, the lack of systems exposure was simply a virtue of the fact that some of them were not required at the time it was constructed, right?
It wasn't sprinkled.
It wasn't sprinkled required. So that was something that was not a response to an investigation of intent. Like, oh, he didn't want to show the sprinklers. Well, there weren't any sprinklers, right? So I guess the idea of concealment of certain things is likely, in thinking about your question, is likely also a desire of ours, right? So that's, I think, maybe it's a good moment to think self-critically about, what maybe I just said, and also when does the hand of the author, the newer author in place, versus trying to interpret or replicate the intent of the original author? That's a good question. I might respond by saying that perhaps some of that actually was our desire, not necessarily a manifestation of what we thought his desire was.
Although in New York, one typically tries to avoid running the plumbing outside of the envelope.
Yeah, that's right. That's true.
It was in the atrium of
Yeah.
the open place, so
Yeah.
it's interior that exposed.
Another question?
Yeah, I would just comment about the Walker Guesthouse. The Walker Guesthouse is on loan for 20 months. Is that right, 20?
Until March 2020.
Yeah, okay. 20 months is on loan from the Sarasota Architecture Foundation to Palm Springs. And there will be the big symposium out there in February. And I also want to just mention the Sarasota Architecture Foundation. Two of their officers are here. And that's the organization that had the Walker Guesthouse built. And then let me go backwards. The Walker Guesthouse was originally built when there was no bridge to Sanibel. So the building was the original building was constructed as elements that were then taken to the site and built to the site. So Rudolph certainly did do that in his early work, very, very clearly. And the other thing to mention is there's another Rudolph celebration, and that's in Sarasota the 9th, 10th, and 11th of next month. Sarasota Architecture Foundation is having a 100th birthday party for Paul Rudolph there. So join us.
I would also point out that at the Palm Springs Modernism sort of birthday celebration for Rudolph, the current dean of Yale will speak, Deborah Burke.
We have time for one more comment or question. Yes, sir.
I have not really a question, more a comment. I come from the other end, from what you guys basically talking about, the design. I had the pleasure of actually working for Paul Rudolph from 1985 to 86. I'm a cabinet maker. And I spent about half my time at Brightman Place, 23 Brightman Place. At that time, mostly maintaining things. But it was definitely interesting. It changed a lot of things he wanted me to do. It can be done. But he wanted to have it done. And when you spoke about the small elevator, some challenges, you want to bring material up into his place. It was a challenge every day, but it shaped my life, it shaped my future, my current, what I'm doing. I'm extremely privileged to work for him. And I think the renovation you did is incredible.
Thank you.
I would love to see it. Because I saw it before.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all very much. That's all we have time for.